today. As I briefly mentioned earlier, that it is the most important organ of the body, and it is the organ that requires the most energy from the body. Okay, it is the whole nervous system is divided into two parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Okay, and we'll discuss about how it interacts and how it is formed and the function that each of them specifically plays in regulating the body activities and processing and coordination of signals, and then responding to the required stimulus and the environment in general. So this picture might be a little gross for some people, but it basically gives you an idea of where the brain starts and the spinal cord begins, and how the nerves are in general distributed across the human body. Now, this is the, I need to get rid of this. Yeah. Okay, so what is the nervous system? The nervous system basically is a combination of neurons and its supporting cells, the blood supply that it requires, and its ability to receive the stimulus and to respond accordingly. The basic components of this is the neuron, okay, the astrocytes, which are more in the peripheral nervous system, ependymal cells that produce the cerebrospinal fluid. We have oligodendrocytes, which are more to do with the central nervous system. Microglia, the examples that you see over here, this is the immune system of the nervous system. Okay, now, even though we are going to have a discussion on adult human brain and the spinal cord and how it is composed and actively performing its function, in order to understand the anatomy behind the brain and the spinal cord, it is necessary to go into the developmental stages. Okay, so the brain basically is developed from the ectoderm, and ectoderm is the topmost layer of the embryo, and it starts to close in the middle and then closes towards the outside and then toward the inside. So it's like, it's like a stitch kind of thing that you go like this. Okay, so important thing again is that as the brain grows, the hindbrain, midbrain, forebrain comes in to the development. We won't go into what is that and what is going to make of that. However, what I want you guys to realize is that the brain starts to fold on itself, okay, and goes through these different phases until it forms a brain, a cerebellum, a brain stem, and the spinal cord subsequently. So again, to divide the nervous system, we have the brain over here, the spinal cord, and the brain itself can be divided into a number of different segments. And we'll go into the details of what the segments are, what their roles are, and then the brain stem that is present over there, and finally the spinal cord that you see. Now here is a cross section of the spinal cord. We'll spend a lot of time discussing that also. Okay, so over here, this is one of the bad things about doing these sessions online, is that we cannot have a didactic kind of interaction among each other. But what I would request is for the participants to just ask the question if they have any, and we can go into that. Otherwise, at the end, we will have a question answer session. Now, over here, you're looking at the brain. Oh, this portion is the frontal cortex. This is the parietal cortex. This is the temporal cortex, and this is the occipital lobe, or the occipital cortex over here. This is, evolutionarily speaking, that the more um, uh, it's the most latest development in the nervous system. Now, when we grow into this, when we break up the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe, inside we see this insular lobe. Okay, this is always something that the students forget. We ask them how many lobes are there, and they say frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, that's the end, but they always forget the insular lobe over here, which is dug into these two over here. It is a very specified region. It plays a very significant role in our body, and it plays and it functions accordingly. So let's talk about the role of the cortex that is overlying these lobes. Now let's start off with the frontal lobe. This is actually, let's first go to the occipital lobe. This is playing with the role with the vision. It receives the visual stimulus from the eyes, it processes it, it tells the brain what we are looking at. Okay, and that is the whole combination of receiving a stimulus with the surrounding organs, with the hearing and the other perceptions. That is what makes your vision complete. But occipital lobe is the key component over here. The parietal lobe is basically involved in the perception of the world. Okay, it is more to do with your functioning, your arithmetic, spelling. If you are a musician, then playing a piano or something like that. Then we have a specific sensory cortex over here. This is the primary sensory cortex, and it then divides into secondary and tertiary. We'll talk about that in a minute. We also have this motor cortex, the primary motor cortex between over here, and then the temporal lobe, which is more to do with the memory, understanding, and language, speech in particular. It plays a very significant role. Now, as I said before, if we dig into the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe, we have what's called the insular lobe, and it is more to do with the self-awareness and the judgment of the degree of senses, the social, emotion, empathy, homeostasis. All of these are dug into the insular lobe over here. Now, the frontal lobe, that is evolutionarily the most important aspect of the human brain. It plays the role in executive functions, thinking, planning, organizing, problem solving, emotions, behavior, oops, sorry about that, and personality. The most important aspect of this is the thing that gives us the edge over any other organism, is the way that we think, how we plan, how we perceive it, and how we get an understanding of what is surrounding us. As they say in Urdu, shaur jise kaha jayega, that is what is the real essence of this segment. Now, the whole brain itself is a huge organ. Now, back in the 1800s, this fellow named Corbinian Brodmann, all he did was to take sections of the brain, okay, and he just did a simple Nissl stain. It's a very simple lab procedure. You give them um, uh, crystal violet and basically set it up like that, and you can see different regions of the brain. Now, what this fellow did was that he made sections all over the brain, and just by very carefully looking at um, the organization of these layers, he divided them into 52 areas. Okay, and as it turns out that he wasn't just making a guess. It turns out that these 52 areas actually do have a specific function. So if we were to go and talk about something like a Wernicke's area or a Broca's area, it turns out that this fellow, even though he didn't know what he was looking at, even though he didn't know what was the function of that, he still was able to identify that region, and that region turned out to be playing a specific role. Okay, so his prediction of 52 separate areas turned out to be correct. Okay, now over here we are going to start talking about the motor cortex. The motor cortex, here is the primary motor cortex. Okay, then we have the premotor cortex. Then we have the Broca's area, which is involved in the speech. Then we have the frontal eye field. This is again an important thing. When we talk about vision and we ask a question in the exam, people straight away jump into the occipital lobe and say, you know, this is where it is. But when we are talking about eye movement, a lot of students forget about the motor cortex. They say that it must be playing something, a role over here, which is not correct. The eye field, the frontal eye field, and the movement accordingly is present in this motor area. Now, over here you see the primary motor cortex. Okay, as we looked at it again, and over here, what you can see is that we have significant areas given to the uh, the the part of the body that is playing a role in its function. Now, for example, our hands are most important in handling and touching and feeling and holding things, and conducting very fine maneuvering like writing and other things like that. All of this is being done by hands, and the brain gives a significant portion to the hand and the fingers. The face, all of it has a lot of representation over here, even the tongue. The face has so many expressions that when you are saying something or you are feeling something or anything that you touch on the face, you can know exactly which portion that was, right? And the same thing goes into the motion of different areas. When you're eating, it's another thing. When you are closing your eyes, opening your eyes, lifting up your eyebrows, all of this is present over there. So then we come to the premotor cortex. Now, over here we have the primary cortex, and then this is the premotor cortex. Its main function is that it is located anterior, okay, and it controls learned, repetitive, and pattern motor behavior, like suing, okay, like you are doing something. We have a lot of surgeons probably watching over here. Conducting surgery has become fairly a part of your routine now. So when you go into something, you just this premotor cortex, it controls and patterns that movement. Same thing with like, a lot of Pakistanis would be happy with Pakistan's victory yesterday against India. When a wicketkeeper, for example, takes a ball, he already knows the movement that he wants to do. And all of this is happening in the premotor cortex. It coordinates simultaneous and sequential actions, just as we are talking about, okay? And planning of the movement. Now, after this, we go on to the Broca's area. The Broca's area is present usually on one side of the brain, okay? And it is involved in speech. It is the motor aspect of the speech. We don't have enough time, otherwise I would have showed you videos of how patients with strokes, how when they have the Broca's area affected, how that involves in the production of words that they want to say. Okay. And then we have the frontal eye field that I just talked to you about. It is located above the Broca's area, and it controls voluntary eye movements. Now, let's talk about the sensory cortex or the sensory areas. And mainly it is involved in somatic sensation, taste, you have vision, hearing, even in speech, the Wernicke's area where you're planning on what you want to say, the exact thing, that is happening over here. The general perception, interpretation of the area that is around you. So all of this is present in this region. Now, this is how the homunculus of the sensory area looks like. It is very similar to the aspect that you see in the motor cortex, but you see that a lot of area now again is still being given to the hands and the face, but the gums and the teeth, these are what really spring out in this one. The tongue still gets a lot of expression. The genitals, these are more present over there and expressed over here, because they have to receive the stimulus in order to perform their function of urination or even the sexual functions that happen. Then we come to, so we were talking about the primary sensory cortex. This is the somatosensory association cortex that we see. Now, the role that it plays, sorry about that. It basically is located in the posterior to the primary somatosensory cortex. It integrates sensory information coming from primary somatosensory cortex to produce an understanding of the size, the texture, the relationship of the stimulus. It is not just this that it contains. It gives you a holistic idea of what sensory input is being given to the body. Now, for example, if you're present within, if you're present standing outside in night, okay, and suddenly the lightning flashes, okay, and then it starts raining. First, your vision, it gives you an idea that, okay, I just saw something, and then the hearing comes in, where you hear the lightning, you perhaps get scared, and that also gets involved. The whole perception of this thing. Then if you ask that person, what did you feel or what did you see? He said that I saw and felt the lightning. Okay. Similar thing happens in other aspects also. And then we have, sorry about that, let me just take this down. All right. The primary visual cortex, okay, which is over here, this is what receives the the main the visual system that it starts from the eyes and how it breaks up and then goes down, and this is the area that actually receives the image. Now, the interpretation of the image, complete interpretation, is not the responsibility or the possible function of the visual cortex. What it does is that it absorbs that information, sends it to the secondary visual cortical areas, the tertiary areas, and then they make a sense of what they have seen. And in that, if hearing or your own posture and other things are also involved, that affects on what you have seen. Okay. Vision is a very detailed topic. We obviously cannot talk about that in detail over here. The auditory cortex over here, this is present in this region, 41 and 42, and it is also present in a topographic fashion. Now, just as you saw in the homunculus, okay, over here, you see 500 hertz to 5,000 hertz of the frequency of sound that is being perceived in this region. Now, again, it is being received, the information, but it is being processed as a function of the other segments of the brain also. The next thing is the olfactory cortex. It is present over here. The olfaction is basically the smell that you feel around yourself. If you look at other evolutionarily more developed animals like cats, dogs, even monkeys, gorillas, their olfaction is much more than us, and a larger portion of their brain is given to that whole thing. Gustatory or taste is present over here. Again, it's in the insular region and the slightly in the frontal lobe also. Now, before we go into this anything else, let's talk briefly about the cerebellum. The cerebellum, back to this, okay. The cerebellum is composed of three parts: the anterior lobe, the posterior lobe, okay, and you have the vermis over here. Again, anterior, posterior, vermis, okay. And again, a lot of functions that it plays. Important thing to note that usually people do not know about this is that the total number of cells within the our cerebellum is more than the other parts of the whole nervous system. So in other words, the brain and the spinal cord, every other thing, if you take all the neurons and their glial cells together, they will be less than as compared to this compact region of the body that is our cerebellum. If we open it up again, it looks, this is what the anterior lobe is, this is the posterior, the vermis, and I just want you to see how much area is being given to each region, okay. And okay, so why have we talked so much about anterior, posterior, and actually I did not mention the the flucuncular lobe, which is also a part over here. Okay, so let's talk about the functions. One is control of posture, and this is received by muscle tone. Executive executes as the coordinate muscle activity of the trunks and the limb. The vermis that we talked about control axial and girdle musculature, whereas the intermediate hemisphere controls the limb musculature. Okay. The posterior lobe, the big, huge one, it is involved in planning, coordination, and execution, and rapid, fine, skilled movement. But mainly, it is more to do with the balanced approach to doing something. Okay, and so that your balance that you know that your hand, for example, is present in a particular position and it's doing something. So it knows that it is right now in one supination and then pronation over here, for example. It knows where it is and how, if you want to write, what position it needs to be, what should be the balance of the hand over here. So we have talked a lot about this. Another thing to notice is that we have a lot of connecting fibers which connect the left lobe to the right, the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere, and within the hemispheres also, it also goes from one region to another, from the higher areas to the lower areas, to the lower areas to the higher areas. And one of the most interesting one is the arcuate fascicle. This is taking the information from the Wernicke's area to the Broca's area, which is involved in the speech. So if this, for example, gets cut for some reason, with a bullet or during a surgery, for example, if this gets severed, this is how probably speech will be affected. Okay, so we have the projection fibers which leave the hemisphere to the subcortical region. So these are the projection fibers. Okay, this is the commissural fiber which connects one hemisphere to another. And finally, the association fibers, which is left to left and basically this, and right to right. Okay, or in other words, intra-hemispheric connections. All right. Before we go into the spinal cord, just a brief thing. I know I'm talking to doctors over here. You guys know this better than me, but this is a typical brain, how it looks like. You take the Alzheimer's disease patient and look at how the cortex has shrunk down, and this has created larger vesicles over here. The cortex, again, you see very, very sharp things over here. This is another very interesting disease, the frontotemporal dementia caused by Pick's disease. In this one, the shrinkage is so sharp that it actually looks like a blade-like or a knife-like appearance. Again, the function of dementia, aphasia, it is present. Tau proteins is one of the key things that you see in autopsy of these patients, which is present in this immunohistochemistry slide that you see over here. Okay. This is a very dramatic representation of what epilepsy is. Again, the specialists in neurology would know that there are many types of seizures that happen, but two or more uncontrolled and highly active seizures, they give the diagnosis of epilepsy. There are many types of seizures. What you're looking at over here is probably the tonic phase, and post-ictal, the patient is confused, very tired, and then it takes them some time to come back to this activity. Again, this requires a whole different discussion. And I still have a few things to show you before we move on to the next session. This over here is the general aspects of the cranial nerve. Now, I did not include this, but I will probably discuss this briefly again when we talk about the spinal nerves. But cranial nerves, the important thing about them is that they begin within the cranium. When we talk about the cranium, it's the skull, basically, okay? And in this region, you have olfactory, okay? A severed fibers, but you see the optic nerve that is coming up over here. The number 3, the oculomotor, okay? Movement of the eyes are involved, and then you have the trochlear, which is present over here, okay? And then trigeminal over here, it plays a role in, again, if you go into the deep functions of these, they will take a lot of time. The abducen, okay, it is a huge cranial nerve, and it is dedicated to just one movement of the eye. It's amazing nerve. And then you have the facial over here, which is for some reason written intermediate. And then the vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal. Now, accessory cranial nerve is something that is still of discussion between neuroscientists, because it actually leaves the cranium and then goes back and then does its thing. So the question for everybody was that if it is leaving the cranium, should we call it an actual nerve or not? And that's why it is still declared as a accessory nerve. So then comes the spinal cord, okay, and this is the main connection between the brain and the rest of the body, and it is present within the vertebral spine. We'll come to that in a second. These are just the nuclei. I don't want you to spend too much time on these, but again, what I want you to understand is that the cranial nerves, they have multiple origins at time, and they come in as a combination of factors that result in their function. Now, also to understand is that the origin can differ from nerve to nerve. So if you look at just the cranial nerve 6, the abducen, it has a small origin. But if you look at the trigeminal one, the cranial nerve 5, it is gigantic, okay? Similarly, other areas of the brain, the nerves that are present, they have a huge areas that are, twinkled up over here, especially the vagus nerve. Now, vagus nerve has so many origins that it is difficult to follow. And the vagus nerve, if you go back, sorry, is shown over here like this, but it is, if you look at the rest of the body, it goes to a lot of different regions. The word vagus is a wanderer. That's the meaning. In Urdu, we call awara, okay? And this nerve goes everywhere. All right, so let's talk about the functions of these cranial nerves. Olfaction for the first one, so that this is coming in from the nose. the optic nerve, which is receiving information from the eyes. Okay, then you have the um, your trochlear, okay, which is allowing the eye movement towards the upside. Okay, and then you have, if I can find it correctly, uh, abducen, which is external rectus muscle. You have the oculomotor, which is present over here. This is all of the eye movements except the ones that are controlled by abducen and trochlear. Then you have the trigeminal, which gives the sensory information to these three regions of the face, and it plays a lot of other functions. It is not possible to discuss all of this in such a short time. Then we have the facial nerve. It is playing a role in taste and also in the movement of the facial muscles. Okay, this is the vestibulocochlear nerve. These are two different nerves. One is taking the vestibular information about your balance and your cochlear about your hearing, and then traveling together as cranial nerve 8 to its target. Then you have the glossopharyngeal, which is involved in tongue movement. Vagus nerve, as I said, is a wanderer. It goes everywhere, okay? From your lungs, heart, to the trachea, larynx, pharynx, everywhere, okay, to your ears even. The accessory nerve, it's mainly involved in this one muscle, that is the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and PDS, which is on the back side, but mainly it is involved in just turning of the head from one side to the other one. Hypoglossal, this is again for the muscles of the tongue. Okay, so this is how cranial nerves that are originating from within the skull, they are then going out and doing their function in the rest of the body. The spinal cord is a long length fiber, so as fast as from C1 to the L2-3 in adults. It is the length of the spinal cord, and it has a number of overlapping functions. Just very briefly, just to understand that there is a ascending function and then there is a descending function. By ascending function, we mean, or the ascending tracks, they're taking the information from the peripheral part of the body and bringing it up towards the brain. The descending tracks, they take the information from the central nervous system down towards the actual target organs. No need to go into the depth of the titles of each segment over here, but the main thing that I wanted to show you in this figure was that our spinal cord is very compact. It is playing a role in the brain communicating with the body and the body communicating to the brain. All right. And basically what happens is that you have the spinal cord, you have the ventral root, which is towards the front, and you have the dorsal root, okay? So it receives information from the dorsal root, and then it gets processed over here. If there is an immediate reaction, it can go out through the ventral root, or it can send the information up towards the brain. And when it comes out from the ventral root, basically, it forms the rami and the spinal nerves. We'll go about this. We have a whole session dedicated to this. But the important thing that I want you to understand is that these ganglia that you see, they are present together and they form a chain. I'll show you the figures of these when we talk about the spinal nerves. Okay. Just final thing about the spinal cord and the spinal canal. If you have the disc in here, you have the vertebral disc, and there over here is the normal one. If there is some herniation for some reason, it can cause a lot of pain, and if it is present in towards a motor area, it can cause the loss of motion in that particular region. Okay. Now, with that, I would like to end this part segment for my talk, but I want to spend the next 15 minutes at least answering any questions that you have. So I would request that whoever has a question, just please raise their hands or type it in the typing region. Please, anybody get started.
Sir, as you said that the spinal cord start from the C1 to the L2 in adult, then how in children?
The same, well, it depends on the age of the child, but it can go down to the L3-4 region. So that is why when you as a doctor go to collect the spinal fluid in the adults, you can be you can go easily in L4-5 or L3-4 even to get your needle in and get the spinal fluid out. But in the children, it is a very tricky task, especially the young infants, because it is so down the track that you need to be careful that you don't puncture the spinal cord itself. Okay. So, Dr. Aisha, have I answered your question? Are you satisfied? Okay, perhaps. Any other question, please? Anything that did not make sense or did not flow into your understanding?
Sir, what is the main difference between Broca's areas and Wernicke's area? Both are related to speech, but
yes.
How can we differentiate clinically?
Excellent question, and very good. Thank you for asking this. Okay, so Broca's area is involved in planning of what to say. Okay, so that if you ask a person, what is your name? Okay, and he says, Dr. Fazal. Okay, there are two things that are happening. One is that I have planned that to say Dr. Fazal. Second thing is that I executed the function in which I actually said those words. Okay, the planning part is the Broca's area. Okay, and the actual execution of the word is the Wernicke's area. Okay, so what happens is, for example, if you have damage in the Broca's area, the person will still be able to speak. So if you ask them, what's your name? And they'll start talking about, in the market, today's dollar value is Pakistan won the cricket match, and, all of that, all this mixed speech then comes in because the person can still speak. But on the other hand, if the Broca's area is, the Wernicke's area is affected, that results in making the speech come out. So for example, you ask me that, what is your name? And I won't be able to say it, that my name is Dr. Fazal. Okay. This restriction of speech, that is where the areas come in. And so again, if you ask a person who had a stroke in this region that, about anything, they will start to squirm because they know the answer. They want to say that, but they can't say that. Okay. On the other hand, a person with a stroke on the Broca's area will start speaking, but he won't answer your question. Okay. Makes sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other?
सर इंटरनल कैप्सूल के बारे में काइंडली कुछ बता दीजिए, थोड़ा सा इंट्रो दे दीजिए. थैंक यू.
सर, आई वांट टू आस्क अ क्वेश्चन. सर, हम लोग कहते हैं कि लेफ्ट जो मतलब हेमिस्फीयर है, विच इज द डोमिनेंट वन, उसके अंदर जो मतलब ब्रोकास एरिया एंड वर्निकीज आर प्रेजेंट ओवर देयर ना, तो मतलब राइट साइड के ऊपर इनका कोई काउंटर पार्ट होता है, या मतलब ऐसा है कि वहां पे भी ब्रोकास और वर्निकीज प्रेजेंट है, बट वो सिर्फ ऐसा है कि कंट्रोल नहीं करते, मतलब क्या होता है, मतलब ये इसमें थोड़ी कंफ्यूजन होती है.
Okay, so again, very good questions, both of them. The internal capsule again is well, it's a more anatomical structure. So until I have a figure, I cannot quite explain that. I'm sorry about this, but again, sorry, your next question was, could you repeat the second question, please? What was that? You just asked that? The second question? Oh yeah, the left-right coordination. So yes, the Broca's and the Wernicke's is more predominant on the left side. Okay. The areas are present on the other side also, but they are not dedicated to the speech. Okay. The same thing we see in every other region. So it's again, it's not a mirror reflection over there, but it is, the region is still present. Now the same thing goes in the hippocampus also. The hippocampus is the area which retrieves memory and then tells you that, whatever the answer is, or, whatever you wanted to remember at that time. In this one also, there is a dominance that your left hippocampus, it is more dominant, and that is what is helping you remember things. Now, if, for example, a person has should I say, shrinkage, okay, of this, or sclerosis of the hippocampus of the left side, the right side slowly starts to take over. Okay, and it does the best it can to do in playing a role in your memory. Now, does that apply to the speech areas in the right and the left lobe? To the best of my knowledge, there is no data to represent that. There is a question written over here. Keys for comprehension of speech. Okay, thank you if I mix them up. On which part of, yes. G also, well, psychosis is something that is more related to the parietal lobe, and also into the other lower areas of the brain. Again, psychosis is a difficult subject to put a finger on, that this is the region that is involved. Because psychosis itself is not a disease. Psychosis is kind of a symptom that becomes a part of a disease. Okay. And then the drugs, for example, everything that those also function according to the area that has been involved. The question that Rabia has asked is that on which brain area antipsychotic drugs act on mood elevators and antidepressant? Difficult to answer that question. Difficult to answer that question, but what I would say is that the regions which express the serotonergic neurons, okay, and which are taking one information from the other side, and the same thing about the dopaminergic neurons, which are all present in the lower areas of the brain. And by lower areas, I mean the amygdala and other regions like that. They are the regions that receive these drugs, and most probably, that is how we have response of drugs to the psychiatric disorders. Now, again, psychiatric disorders are difficult to pinpoint because when we say that, for example, very commonly used drug, SSRIs, fluoxetine, okay, we say that it is selective serotonergic reuptake inhibitor. But is the effect only restricted to that or on other sides also? Similarly, depression, if we talk about that in terms of since we are talking about psychiatric disorders, is serotonergic neurons only involved in that, or can norepinephrine, epinephrine areas also play a role in that? That is why drugs like there are drugs out there, Effexor, for example. These drugs, they basically go ahead and target both the serotonergic and the noradrenergic neurons, and they prevent the reuptake inhibition. Very good drugs to treat depression. However, their function is not completely understood. The same thing goes with the disease also, and a lot of doctors, they mix them up, that this particular portion is the reason why this person has this disorder. And psychiatry is a huge field. We don't have probably a time to do that, but it's amazing. Remember one thing, every part of the brain is connected to all the other parts of the brain, okay? And I'll show you a video clip later on. Our brain has 86 billion neurons, okay? When it has so many neurons, they always interconnect. And therefore, identifying that, yeah, this is the only region that does that work. It's easy to put a label on it, and we do that. We say these, what my thesis advisor used to say, noble lies, okay? Because we want to make simple answers to the questions that you ask. But the fact of the matter is that the central nervous system is still one of the most difficult and incompletely understood systems of the body. Okay. All right. Any other question?
सर एक चीज और ये पूछनी थी कि like if we talk about fine finger movements like writing something or typing something, तो उसके लिए हम क्या कहेंगे? मतलब जो motor homunculus है, it is more responsible, or cerebellum?
Okay, both of them play a role. Okay, cerebellum tells you where your body is. Okay, and in terms of अगर आप लेट के टाइपिंग कर रहे हो तो आपके हाथ कहाँ पर हैं, अगर आप डेस्क पे बैठ के टाइपिंग कर रहे हो तो आपके हाथ कहाँ पर हैं, किस पोजीशन पर हैं, ठीक है. All of this is being controlled by the cerebellum. The primary motor cortex, it is executing the motion. Remember one thing, and a lot of students mix this up. Remember that the motor cortex, the primary motor cortex, it just executes that motion. Okay, it is not planning that motion that you want to say. So if you want to say that, if you want to type something, or do some fine needle, if you want to apply a stitch in a person, okay, that applying the stitch, that part is being controlled by the motor cortex. But making the plan and actually coming up with the sequence, yes, here I will insert the needle, this is where I'll take it out, then I'm going to take it out and flip flop it, and then I'll close it like that. All of this is part of the other areas, of the higher areas of the motor cortex. Any other question?
सर वो विजन के लिए जो आपने पार्ट्स बता दिए, एक ऑक्सीपिटल और एक फ्रंटल में, इसको हम किस तरह डिफरेंशिएट कर सकते हैं सर?
अच्छा, देखो, if I want to see something, see, I will put my eyes on that region. Okay, and sorry about that. Yeah, so I'll put my eyes on one region and I'll see, for example, if I have a piece of paper and I'm reading off that words or whatever, that is being taken up and sent back to my occipital lobe, where the visual cortex is. However, the movement of the eyes, that you start off from one region and then you move to the next word, next word, next word, that movement of the eye is being controlled by the motor region of the brain. Okay, is that making sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Dr. Anam Zera has asked a very, very important question regarding which area is affected in autism. Autism disorder has literally taken up the child psychiatry by, like a storm. Right now, 1 in 200 children are autistic. And which area of the brain exactly is affected, we don't know. Which gene is involved, we don't know. That is why we cannot come up with a medical, is to make them, their environment so enriched that helps them to develop a better understanding. However, and these autistic children, they usually have ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. For that, you give them drug to control that. But to resolve autism, you do not have a drug, you do not have a treatment, nothing at all. To be honest, we do not understand where it happens. Corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is basically, if I can, sorry about that. Somebody wrote this over here. Yeah. This is corpus callosum. Okay, it is these fibers that are being the cholesterol fibers that are being taken from one hemisphere to the other hemisphere. Sorry about that. This is being enclosed in the corpus callosum. Now, okay, if I understand your point, okay, so you're saying that is autism involved in corpus callosum? Very unlikely. Corpus callosum is more like, you know, like a glove, okay, or a wristband kind of thing. That type of thing. It is not a, it doesn't play any main role except for holding these fibers together. That's all. Any other question, please? Okay, so if there isn't one, could the coordinators please step in and tell us how to proceed now? Should we take a break or anything else? Furkan, can you hear me? Okay, so it looks like okay, 1 second. All right, so does anybody want to take a break or should we go on to the spinal cord lecture? No break? Okay. All right. Okay, okay, as you order. All right, let's go on to the, let me start sharing my screen again. Okay. Okay, so we are now on the spinal nerves. Now on this, this figure that we have over here, well, not a figure, but the corpse that you see over here, okay? You had the brain, the spinal cord, and all these nerves coming out. Now, when these nerves, they come straight out of the spinal cord, they are called the spinal nerves, okay? Now, this is where the spinal nerves start. Right outside the cranium, there is our C1, and then there are 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal, which is mostly integrated into the 5th sacral region. So it's not really very different than anything else. But these are the main divisions that you see. What is the general aspect of, sorry about that. Yeah, the spinal nerve branches out in pairs, okay? It comes out from both sides at the same time, right and left together, okay? They are taking the message from the brain to the body to execute movement or whatever other information. And similarly, they take information back to the brain, okay, regarding sensation, touch, pain, you know, whatever. Each spinal nerve is composed of a anterior, okay, which is also the ventral segment, and a posterior segment. So if we were to go, this is the anterior or the ventral region, and this is the posterior region, that is the dorsal region. Now, usually the sensory stimulus comes in, it goes through, makes their connection within the gray matter over here, and then the neurons that are present in the gray matter, which the intermediate ones, and then go out through the ventral route. Now, just imagine that you prick your finger on a needle. Now, what you want is to move your hand away, okay? You don't want to spend time in the brain processing and then going back. You don't have that amount of time. For example, if your hand touches a warm, very hot object, you want to move your hand away from it straight away. Similarly, these things apply over here also, that you feel something. If it requires an immediate reaction, it will go and result in a motor movement, okay? And it will also send the information up to the brain to tell it that this is what has happened, okay? So some of these functions are, should I say, immediate reflexes. Some of them are being conducted from the higher segments of the nervous system, like the brain, okay? In some cases, the roots of the spinal nerves, they join together.
Sorry, Dr. Fazal, excuse me for interruption.
Yes,
ये
yes,
chat
yes.
box में है कि ये लोग कह रहे हैं slides are blur. They are not clear.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Let me reconnect 1 second.
सही तो आ रही नहीं।
Okay. Let me share my screen one more time. All right. Is the screen better now? Can somebody reply?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Okay. So we have discussed, Alina, do you have a question? Alina Zaidi? Your hand is raised.
No, sir. I just wanted to tell you that the screen is blurred.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. You can put your hand down now. All right. So we talked about this. And now let's go into the spinal cord again. Just to let you know that how it is composed. Now your sensory information comes in towards this dorsal horn, okay? And then it goes to the ventral horn from which it comes out and conducts its function. The information is also carried up by these different nuclei, the fibers that are going up. I don't want to get into exact function of each and every one of them, but I want you again to know that they are very close to each other and they are simultaneously conducting a function. They are bringing information to the spinal cord. They're also telling, the brain what it is feeling. Okay. So now, apart from the vision and everything, okay, which is coming from the ocular motor to the vagus nerve, etc. Now, if we go into what's called the autonomic nervous system. this is almost completely controlled by the brainstem and mainly the spinal cord. Okay. Now, if we talk about the sympathetic response, which in other words you would like to call the fight and flight reaction. Okay. In this one, it results in this whole chain, the sympathetic chain. So remember the ganglion that we talked about earlier. They form this sympathetic chain, and that sends off the information to the areas of the body which needs to function at a particular time. So for example, if you are going to eat, you will start to have salivation. You will have watering of your mouth, that you're about to eat a chicken tikka or something like that, and you're like, yummy, it's going to be good. Similarly, in breathing, it releases the bronchi so that more air can come in. Okay. It accelerates the heartbeat. Okay. In the intestinal region, it inhibits the activity. It tells the intestine and everything to shut down. I want to concentrate on my fight and flight behavior now. So I mentioned this week the opposite way. So the salivation, it weakly stimulates it. Okay, but the rest of the whole thing, it is basically telling them to let me run quickly. Okay, or there is some danger and I want to run towards that side. In the process, it also helps in the release of bladder so that the urination can occur. In the reproductive system, in males, for example, ejaculation, well, it is a motor function, but after that, emission basically is the system that is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, it is more like you're sitting back, relaxed, your eyes are, relaxed, there's slight dimming and around, and you're watching a TV show or something. You don't need your heartbeat to be high. You don't need the bronchi to be open so that you can, give a larger breathing action. Okay, now you have time to contract your pupils. You don't want extra information to go into your brain. Salivation, yes, now you have time to eat and enjoy life. Contracts bladder. Okay, it basically resolves this issue. It stimulates erection in sex organs. Okay, so in general, this is more of a relaxation mode. This is more of a fight and flight mode. Okay. We have seen this figure before, so I won't spend time on it, but I just want you to see how it is coming out of the spinal cord. Now, over here, between one vertebrae and the other vertebrae, you have a disc that separates it. The advantage of this disc is that it allows some cushion to the vertebrae, okay, to certain extent, to absorb the function. The second thing that it does, it's that it maintains a opening over here of the spinal nerves to come out. If there is no vertebral disc over here, this will fall on the other vertebra, okay, and this spinal nerve will be crushed in the process. So some people who have disc herniation, as I show over here, okay, that can impinge on the nerve, that can cause pain, okay, that can cause depending on where it is, it can result in motor activity restriction. So it is important to understand what the vertebral, how the vertebral column is organized, and what is the role played by these vertebrae. Now, if you look at this whole system, there is meninges around it. You have your spinal cord going in, okay, and all of this is covered around a bone. Okay, there is a body over here, the intervertebral canal where the nerves can come out. Okay, you have these spines that are like this. This allows the person to move left to right, that type of thing. Move it, the legs, move the neck. All of this is based on the distance between them. Okay. Now, what do the nerves do when they come out? One is that they can simply take one region and go in and innervate that region. Or what they can do, as they do in a number of cases, is that they can join and perform a complex function. So in this case, what we call the plexus. Okay, so we have the cervical plexus. Okay, let me bring this down. Yeah, we have the cervical plexus over here, and then we have the brachial plexus, okay, which is C5 to C8, very important over here. And then we have the lumbar plexus that you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You also have the sacral, 4, 5, 6. All of them play complex functions. So the cervical plexus, it basically innervates the head, neck, and the shoulders. The brachial plexus, it innervates the chest, shoulders, arms, hands, and most importantly, the diaphragm also. Okay. And the lumbar plexus, it innervates the lower back, abdomen, groin, parts of the thighs and legs. Okay, and then sacral, finally, it is innervating the buttocks, the thigh muscles of the leg, feet, as well as anal canal and the genital areas. All of this is coming from this one. We'll talk about this in a bit more detail as we proceed. One simple way of understanding the spinal nerve is to think about it in terms of sensory and motor. Okay, so we have these dermatomes. This is the area of a skin that is being supplied by the ventral and dorsal rami of a single spinal nerve. Then we have myotomes. Myotomes are group of muscles that receive nerve fibers from a single spinal nerve. Okay, so this is something that makes our understanding very easy of how a single nerve can play a role in both receiving information and also executing it via the motor function. Now, this is the spinal dermatomes, okay? And what I want you to understand, look at this very, very carefully. Just look at the thorax first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All of them each have a separate region. It goes and it supplies that region, okay? Then you have the lumbar region. And this is also replicant on the back side also. Then you have the lumbar and the sacral region. They form a plexus that goes long and innervates different regions of this system. The sacral region, as we talked about the buttocks and the sexual organs over here, but again, there is plexus that is involved, and this is the most interesting, the cervical plexus that you see, the C2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of them, they join and form what's called the brachial plexus, and this is what is involved in the sensory system of the hands and the whole upper limb. And similarly, the lower limb, it requires a plexus in order to function, in order to receive sexual stimulus, in order to receive any other pain or any other thing that is going on. So this is what we are looking at, okay? Now, another thing to notice is that the spinal cord ends somewhere over here, okay? And then the later lumbar nerves and the sacral and the one coccygeal, all of those come out and they hang like a brush, okay? So we'll see in a second. Over here, actually, it's a very good diagram. So it shows you how the spinal cord has ended over here, okay? But the rest of them, they are hanging in like a brush. So this is the reason why when you do your lumbar puncture, this is the area best to do it, because the needle will not damage the spinal cord, which will have devastating effects. It will just move around and find its place and get the spinal fluid out of it. Okay. Now, how many of, we are not talking too much about this in didactic mode, which is not very good, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of you must have had chicken pox in your childhood, okay? If for some reason there is some immune deficiency or some other trigger, you can have what's called the varicella zoster infection, again, the shingles, and it comes back and it causes extremely painful regions that are supplied by the nerves where the virus was hibernating. Now, in this person, for example, you can see it was most probably the thoracic nerve 7 or 8 in which it is going. And what a remarkable thing to see is that it follows one single path, okay? Over here, it is the cervical nerves that has most probably been affected, and they follow their own path over here, okay? So the virus itself, during chickenpox, it goes into hibernation and gets stored, but when for some reason shingles occur, the rashes and the pain, everything, it comes back, okay? Now, let's talk about the myotomes. The myotomes are basically a group of muscles that receive nerve fibers conveyed by a single spinal nerve, okay? So you have combination of nerves that can supply to different regions, but you have single nerves that supply to particular regions. So I understand that this might create a little bit of confusion that T1 to T12 is looking all brown, but the point of the matter is that each of these T1 to 3 till 12, all of this is being served over here separately by this, okay? At the back side also, it is all separate like this. C5, C8, all of these are lumbar region, again, all of it like that. Most interestingly, our cervical region is over here, okay? But it is being executed over here, the myotome. Why does that happen? Sorry about that. The reason why this happens is that when the embryo is developing, the lungs are small, okay? So the nerve fibers from the cervical regions, they come in and hide underneath. Now, as in the diaphragm, rather, as the child grows, the diaphragm goes down. When it goes down, these nerve fibers also grow along with it. And even though the thorax, the thoracic nerves are present, these fellows, even though they originated in this region, they come down over here, okay? So the myotomes are organized in this fashion. The clinical application of this, you heard in the sensory portion that the disc herniation, it can cause pain and numbness and all of this. Over here, the disc herniation, if it happens in the motor region, it can cause weakness of muscles. So sometimes if the upper C3, 4 are affected, the person is not able to lift the arm higher than the shoulder. It can actually just come up like this and not higher than that. So in that case, you need to surgically go in, remove this disc, and place these days artificial disc, which is very useful. So this is another clinical application of the system. The disc herniation can occur at different regions, and it can result in a number of effects, especially when it happens in the lower lumbar region. It causes defects in the bowel movement, your control in your the urination and all of that, that becomes affected, okay? And again, it is very painful. Now, before I open up for questions, I want you guys to see what is so special about the human brain. This is a small video, and I would really like you to see what this woman has to say about the human brain. Please listen. Could anybody confirm that they could see and also hear the video?
Yes,
Anyone
sir.
speak up? Okay, great.
No voice in the video.
Sir, it's not audible.
Sorry, say that again.
Sir, it's only screen, no voice.
Okay.
Interested in these questions about 10.
Could you hear the voice now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so again, you just start.
What is so special about the human brain? Why is it that we study other animals instead of them studying us? What does a human brain have or do that no other brain does? When I became interested in these questions about 10 years ago, scientists thought they knew what different brains were made of. Though it was based on very little evidence, many scientists thought that all mammalian brains, including the human brain, were made in the same way, with a number of neurons that was always proportional to the size of the brain. This means that two brains of the same size, like these two of a respectable 400 grams, should have similar numbers of neurons. Now, if neurons are the functional information processing units of the brain, then the owners of these two brains should have similar cognitive abilities. And yet one is a chimp and the other is a cow. Now, maybe cows have a really rich internal mental life and are so smart that they choose not to let us realize it, but we eat them. I think most people will agree that chimps are capable of much more complex, elaborate, and flexible behaviors than cows are. So this is a first indication that the all brains are made the same way scenario is not quite right. Let's play along. If all brains were made the same way and you were to compare animals with brains of our brain weighs between 1.
Recording in progress.
Theirs may be bigger, but ours is better. And it could be better, for example, in that it seems larger than it should be, with a much larger cerebral cortex than we should have for the size of our body. So that would give us extra cortex to do more interesting things than just operating the body. That's because the size of the brain usually follows the size of the body. So the main reason for saying that our brain is larger than it should be actually comes from comparing ourselves to great apes. Gorillas can be 2 to 3 times larger than we are, so their brain should also be larger than ours, but instead it's the other way around. Our brain is 3 times larger than a gorilla brain. The human brain also seems special in the amount of energy that it uses. Although it weighs only 2% of the body, it alone uses 25% of all the energy that your body requires to run per day. That's 500 calories out of a total of 2,000 calories just to keep your brain working. So, the human brain is larger than it should be. It uses much more energy than it should, so it's special. And this is where the story started to bother me. In biology, we look for rules that apply to all animals and to life in general. So why should the rules of evolution apply to everybody else but not to us? Maybe the problem was with the basic assumption that all brains are made in the same way. Maybe two brains of a similar size can actually be made of very different numbers of neurons. Maybe a very large brain does not necessarily have more neurons than a more modest-sized brain. Maybe the human brain actually has the most neurons of any brain regardless of its size, especially in the cerebral cortex. So this to me became the important question to answer. How many neurons does the human brain have, and how does that compare to other animals? Now, you may have heard or read somewhere that we have 100 billion neurons. So 10 years ago, I asked my colleagues if they knew where this number came from, but nobody did. I went digging through the literature for the original reference for that number, and I could never find it. It seems that nobody had actually ever counted the number of neurons in the human brain, or in any other brain for that matter. So I came up with my own way to count cells in the brain, and it essentially consists of dissolving that brain into soup. It works like this. You take a brain or parts of that brain and you dissolve it in detergent, which destroys the cell membranes but keeps the cell nuclei intact. So you end up with a suspension of free nuclei that looks like this, like a clear soup. This soup contains all the nuclei that once were a mouse brain. Now, the beauty of a soup is that because it is soup, you can agitate it and make those nuclei be distributed homogeneously in the liquid, so that now by looking under the microscope at just 4 or 5 samples of this homogeneous solution, you can count nuclei and therefore tell how many cells that brain had. It's simple, it's straightforward, and it's really fast. So we've used that method to count neurons in dozens of different species so far, and it turns out that all brains are not made the same way. Take rodents and primates, for instance. In larger rodent brains, the average size of the neuron increases, so the brain inflates very rapidly and gains size much faster than it gains neurons. But primate brains gain neurons without the average neuron becoming any larger, which is a very economical way to add neurons to your brain. The result is that a primate brain will always have more neurons than a rodent brain of the same size. And the larger the brain, the larger this difference will be. Well, what about our brain then? We found that we have on average 86 billion neurons, 16 billion of which are in the cerebral cortex. And if you consider that the cerebral cortex is the seat of functions like awareness and logical and abstract reasoning, and that 16 billion is the most neurons that any cortex has, I think this is the simplest explanation for our remarkable cognitive abilities. But just as important is what the 86 billion neurons mean. Because we found that the relationship between the size of the brain and its number of neurons could be described mathematically, we could calculate what a human brain would look like if it was made like a rodent brain. So, a rodent brain with 86 billion neurons would weigh 36 kilos. That's not possible. A brain that huge would be crushed by its own weight. And this impossible brain would go in a body of 89 tons. I don't think it looks like us. So this brings us to a very important conclusion already, which is that we are not rodents. The human brain is not a large rat brain. Compared to a rat, we might seem special, yes, but that's not a fair comparison to make, given that we know that we are not rodents, we are primates. So the correct comparison is to other primates. And there, if you do the math, you find that a generic primate with 86 billion neurons would have a brain of about 1.2 kilos, which seems just right, in a body of some 66 kilos, which in my case is exactly right, which brings us to a very unsurprising but still incredibly important conclusion. I am a primate, and all of you are primates. And so was Darwin. I love to think that Darwin would have really appreciated this. His brain, like ours, was made in the image of other primate brains. So the human brain may be remarkable, yes, but it is not special in its number of neurons. It is just a large primate brain. I think that's a very humbling and sobering thought that should remind us of our place in nature. Why does it cost so much energy then? Well, other people have figured out how much energy the human brain and that of other species costs, and now that we knew how many neurons each brain was made of, we could do the math. And it turns out that both human and other brains cost about the same, an average of 6 calories per billion neurons per day. So the total energetic cost of a brain is a simple linear function of its number of neurons. And it turns out that the human brain costs just as much energy as you would expect. So the reason why the human brain costs so much energy is simply because it has a huge number of neurons. And because we are primates with many more neurons for a given body size than any other animal, the relative cost of our brain is large. But just because we're primates, not because we're special. Last question then. How did we come by this remarkable number of neurons? And in particular, if great apes are larger than we are, why don't they have a larger brain than we do with more neurons? When we realized how expensive it is to have a lot of neurons in the brain, I figured maybe there's a simple reason: they just can't afford the energy for both a large body and a large number of neurons. So we did the math. We calculated on the one hand how much energy a primate gets per day from eating raw foods, and on the other hand, how much energy a body of a certain size costs and how much energy a brain of a certain number of neurons costs. And we looked for the combinations of body size and number of brain neurons that a primate could afford if it ate a certain number of hours per day. And what we found is that because neurons are so expensive, there is a trade-off between body size and number of neurons. So a primate that eats 8 hours per day can afford at most 53 billion neurons, but then its body cannot be any bigger than 25 kilos. To weigh any more than that, it has to give up neurons. So it's either a large body or a large number of neurons. When you eat like a primate, you can't afford both. One way out of this metabolic limitation would be to spend even more hours per day eating, but that gets dangerous. And past a certain point, it's just not possible. Gorillas and orangutans, for instance, afford about 30 billion neurons by spending 8.5 hours per day eating, and that seems to be about as much as they can do. 9 hours of feeding per day seems to be the practical limit for a primate. What about us? With our 86 billion neurons and 60 to 70 kilos of body mass, we should have to spend over 9 hours per day, every single day, feeding, which is just not feasible. If we ate like a primate, we should not be here. How did we get here then? Well, if our brain costs just as much energy as it should, and if we can't spend every waking hour of the day feeding, then the only alternative really is to somehow get more energy out of the same foods. And remarkably, that matches exactly what our ancestors are believed to have invented 1.5 million years ago when they invented cooking. To cook is to use fire to pre-digest foods outside of your body. Cooked foods are softer, so they're easier to chew and to turn completely into mush in your mouth. So that allows them to be completely digested and absorbed in your gut, which makes them yield much more energy in much less time. So cooking frees time for us to do much more interesting things with our day and with our neurons than just thinking about food, looking for food, and gobbling down food all day long. So because of cooking, what once was a major liability, this large, dangerously expensive brain with a lot of neurons, could now become a major asset, now that we could both afford the energy for a lot of neurons and the time to do interesting things with them. So I think this explains why the human brain grew to become so large, so fast in evolution, all the while remaining just a primate brain. With this large brain now affordable by cooking, we went rapidly from raw foods to culture, agriculture, civilization, grocery stores, electricity, refrigerators, all those things that nowadays allow us to get all the energy we need for the whole day in a single sitting at your favorite fast food joint. So what once was a solution now became the problem. And ironically, we look for the solution in raw food. So what is the human advantage? What is it that we have that no other animal has? My answer is we have the largest number of neurons in the cerebral cortex, and I think that's the simplest explanation for our remarkable cognitive abilities. And what is it that we do that no other animal does, and which I believe was fundamental to allow us to reach that largest number of neurons in the cortex? In 2 words, we cook. No other animal cooks its food. Only humans do, and I think that's how we got to become human. Studying the human brain changed the way I think about food. And I'll look in my kitchen and I bow to it. And I thank my ancestors for coming up with the invention that probably made us humans. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now I'll finish off this session by answering any questions that we have. I think we have a few. Okay, so please go ahead and ask any questions that you have.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So you explained the disc herniation. So I just want to ask one thing: that what is the most common area? What is the most common site in spinal cord where the herniation takes place?
It's the cervical region and the lumbar region. And interestingly, this is the region that is most free. Now, if I was to take you back, over here, for example, you see that we can move our neck freely. Okay. Same thing goes towards our lumbar region that is below our rib cage and above the pelvis. Okay, so between that also the lumbar region, this is where we can move or twist our body. Over here we can move our neck from one side to another. This is probably the most affected area where you see disc herniation. This is the point where it is most active, and That's it. That's pretty much the answer to your question. Any other? Okay, so some student has asked about disc herniation. Sorry, not disc herniation, the ascending and the descending tracks. It will take a long time to go into the details of every tract and how it does. Okay, before I answer the exam questions, I just want you to know that each of them have separate information that it takes up towards the brain. And similarly, over here, there is specific information that comes down from the brain into this region. Instead of picking out every name and answering towards this, I just want you to know the broad areas, okay? And the main concept that I wanted to give you in this talk was that the ascending and the descending areas are separately located, okay? And they don't overlap each other. So the spinal cord, even though it is pretty compact, it is not overlapping. So descending and ascending affects differently. Now, somebody has asked about, is that it? I mean, are we done with spinal nerves? That is it. Spinal nerves are pretty much it. The nerve involved in eye movement, again, those are cranial nerves. And we have talked about the six nerves that have, the three nerves rather, that have the capacity to move the eye in different directions. What I would recommend for you is to go ahead and read up on cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6, and see how it results in the movement of eyes. Okay. Any other? No, don't worry about the ascending and descending tracks. Yeah, I won't be asking any question regarding the ascending and descending track. I will be making the question for this, and that is what I'm saying. You did not get any point related to exam. What do you mean by that? I think we discussed. Could you speak up? I cannot understand what you're trying to ask. Could you turn on your audio and speak up? If not, then would anybody else like to ask any question?
Sir, Assalamu alaikum. Sir, I just want to ask are we done with these ascending and descending tracks? Because I feel this is like some kind of insufficient for us, because in the exams there are very complicated questions asked related to the ascending and descending tracks. So that is why we are all wondering, like, so are we done with this? Because this feels very incomplete.
Yes, this time I don't want you to spend too much time on ascending and descending tracks. There are other regions of the nervous system that do not get enough attention by the students and by the faculty also, which I think we paid more attention to today. And I think that within the space of the time that was allotted to me, I think that is enough. However, if you feel that you want to read more about this, the textbooks that are present, I would recommend Barr's Neuroanatomy is a very good textbook for this purpose. Okay.
So which book? Sorry, I couldn't hear.
The writer's name is Barr's, B-A-R-R-S,